lasts like a week.
Welcome to Richmond Community Schools Board of School Trustees, Wednesday, December 13th, 2017, business meeting and work session, since this is the only meeting we'll be having in the month of December. And now we'll have, if you would please stand for the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now we'll have the reading of our mission statement.
Richmond Community Schools guide students on pathways of learning to a future of limitless possibilities.
Thank you, Brad. And the vision statement?
Richmond Community Schools, a community nurturing mind, body, and spirit to prepare students for a life of choice, purpose, and service.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
And now we're ready for celebrations and reflections.
This time I'd like to invite Dr. Hartley to the podium. Dr. Hartley, as all of you know, is our Director of Elementary Education, and this month we will be getting a report on elementary education. So, Dr. Hartley.
Greetings and salutations and Merry Christmas to all. For the sake of time, you're probably going to get the Reader's Digest version of things, and then I can follow up with some of the other materials and a board update for you, and I can get those to Mr. Terrell, and he can get those out to you. So a couple of things I wanted to share with you tonight. It was just overall, last spring I got together with my building leaders, and we really focus on growth at the elementary level, especially with the young ones. There is a thing called the achievement gap, and the way to close that is through growth. Achievement is very important, but we're really measuring our success at this point in time through growth, and not just what is recommended growth, but growth above and beyond. And we've got some really good data to show that. Now, what I wanted to do, though, was kind of, we tend to always look at the data. What I had for all of you was a great way to really see what's happening in our elementaries and in our secondaries is to take a look at Twitter. And so about at 5:30, all of my principals started tweeting out some things that they have been doing, and they hit at We Are Richmond, so you could talk about that. And so what I wanted to do, and it's not quite going to work now, since that I kind of gave them that time frame to work in, but it's out there to see is all the great things that don't necessarily show up in NWA data, ISTEP data, which all is important, but things like how they're approaching some staff development in their buildings with the pineapple charts and what that means. And you can see what Adam has there. And then today at STAR, they had their building level spelling bee, and so all those great things are right there. And I'm just click on this. This is at Fairview, and you can really follow him there, using Flipgrid, all kinds of different things. You can, teachers talking about failing forward, and really great things in terms of the positive behaviors, positive office referrals. Those are happening at STAR, they're happening at Charles, they're happening at Fairview, is where kids are recognized and sent down to the office instead of the traditional, if a kiddo does make a poor choice, they get that kind of referral. This is one where they get to go down, they get recognized. It's a public recognition with parents, with the school. It's really cool at Fairview. You can sometimes they'll get on Facebook Live and do it Facebook Live, and it's a whole celebration. At the end of the day, the whole school celebrates, and it's not like a once a week thing. This is a daily thing where sometimes we get a little sideways with ourselves, and we tend to focus on those things that aren't always, the reality of kids. They make poor choices sometimes, but really more often than not, our kids make great choices, and we want to make sure that we're recognizing that. So that is out there, and I can put in an update for you guys to go and look at that. It's there at the We Are Richmond hashtag. And then this is what I put together probably in the middle of November, so there's a little thankful theme in it. But what I did is I took each of the board goals, and a picture says 1,000 words. And I put this, made this quick little YouTube video It is about 7 minutes. I can run with it, or I can send the link and you guys can, and so I apologize for the stock music. I just didn't want to pay any kind of royalties to anybody. So it's just stock music and it loops once or twice, so, but I think it does, it highlights those great things that we're doing.
Like a really good artist.
there's a whole lot in there. It's packed with a lot of stuff, and most of those pictures, 90% of those, came from Twitter, starting from August. There were a couple that came from last spring, but you can really see there's the positive office referrals in there, some new partnerships we had in the community, some long-standing ones like Safety Town in there. So, and then you back up to the beginning, and you look at, you see the little guys with the writing in the sand and using the iPad to clone it. That's part of the Orton-Gillingham process, the multi-sensory reading that we're really working on, building a cadre there. There's just a lot to pack in, a lot of great things happen in the pack in just a few minutes, and I know there's other business to get to. But I really, if I got anything to say to all of you tonight, is that I've got some fabulous building leaders and some fabulous classroom teachers that are really the ones that they're making things move, and I'm excited for the wave of kiddos that are going to start pushing through at the intermediate and high school level, especially in the realm of literacy. And then Jay Michael and I, we've really worked hard to look at that literacy piece and how to keep that wave moving through to the fact that, you know, reading adoption is still a year plus out, but we're going to start working with that committee come here January and February, because it's so important to what we do as the elementary, and then so important as we move through. So one last thing, and I will scan these things in and get them to you in a board update, but the other piece of, and I don't think it was illustrated well in any of those, that last spring Sheila had come across a resource and I think I put this in a board update earlier in the school year with Dr. Desautel's from Butler about students in poverty and trauma and what that, being in a state of what poverty does in terms of constant stress and how that affects a developing brain, especially with our kiddos. And she was able to come here and spend a day with a group of teachers, but then also our Tuesday Skype sessions, and we're working on bringing her back for some more, and even pushing up with Mike's blessing. Him and I, like I said, we've worked really well together on trying to bring that to the secondary level, because it's really powerful stuff. And it's definitely we're trying to get out in front of some of the needs. We've all talked about what we anticipate as a current preschoolers and pre-preschoolers start to push up through and some of the needs that they're going to have. So this is really important stuff, so we're trying to get out in front of that. Questions, comments, specifics? I know it's a lot. It's kind of a shotgun blast of information. So
I would just like for you to come back at some point, because I know you didn't have a lot of time tonight, but I'm very curious about the multisensory approach to
it's really
reading.
cool. Something that we
I'd like to know how it works.
Yeah, and it's something that so you how we've structured it for learning for our teachers, and I think it's something we learned from the next gen cadre, that it's taking that trainer model, but putting them in a cohort so they can move through. So we've got a really strong cohort now. On the January PD day, we're going to have a session. We're going to bring that group of teachers together. Any of you are welcome to come to that, and that would give you a real good meeting. Look at that, but I'm very happy and willing to come and talk about literacy all you want. It's kind of it's important, so I'm very happy to do that. And
Can you get that out to us when that
yes,
happens?
I can do that for you, and you're welcome to come and do that. And once again, thanks to, it's something that I've used with my own two boys personally. They both have learning disabilities, and it's really pushed them, but also it was really a grassroots request from one of the second grade teachers at Star. She had a conversation with Mrs. Polk-Meek, and then they said, "Hey Corey, what do you know about it?" And I said, "I'm glad you asked, because I know quite a bit about it, just from a personal standpoint." And so we're really working to, I think that's going to address a lot of, in conjunction with some of the brain learning we've gotten from Dr. Desautel's. I think those two things coupled together we're going to see some strong results.
And January 5th is the day of the
Yeah,
PD.
when we do that, we're going to have a session. We still haven't put the sign-up schedule out for teachers. Jay Michael hasn't, and we're finalizing a few things on that, but that should be going out soon. And you're all more than welcome to come and sit in on that session. What we're going to be doing is talking what's worked well, what hasn't, where they need some further support, and then the plan is to bring back the Gillingham folks one day for that cadre of teachers, and then look at doing a summer institute. It's a the initial training is 5 days, and it's very much like a college course. It's a lot packed in. So bring that back for elementary and secondary folks if they would like to do that. It's looking at maybe June or July. So.
Okay.
I had a question.
Sir.
I guess with Mr. Thomas's iStep video, I understand what we're doing on growth. Where are we on achievement? I mean,
Sure.
we're not where we need to be. So
Right.
what do you see happening
So,
with that?
yeah, and that's where I reference you can read about it in pretty much any educational publication. They talk about an achievement gap. I'm sure you've heard of that term. It's been around forever. And so it's really, it's that gap between where a kiddo is and where most people would expect them to be. It's a pretty simple concept. In order to close that achievement gap, sometimes you hear, well, if the kids aren't ready, why are you moving on, kind of things like that. Be able to close that gap, I say it's very simple, but it's not. But the idea is simple in that you focus on growth, and then it's not just growth, it's growth plus. And so with Sam's video, that's something, Sam and I last year, the DOE put out this really obscure webinar, and we watched and we thought, really, that's what they're doing? And so we started digging down, pulled J. Michael into it, and you can really see the results of that if you go back and you look at the school letter grades for Star and Fairview. Those are the places Carrie Ann Polkmeek and her coach latched onto it, and then myself working with the administration at Fairview, we looked at how we grouped kids, and so you start to see that growth catch up to that achievement. And we're not there, but the way it was recognized was in the school letter grade. And so it's not something that happens overnight, definitely, but we are starting to see those positive trends in that way. And the really great thing, and I didn't put it here, is that the coach at Star attended a session at Fusion, and so now we're taking a couple things. We're taking that growth data from iStep. We are taking the effect size to know basically to answer the question, to know our impact. Are we really doing what we're doing? But we're looking at it in shorter gaps. We're doing that at all 6 elementaries. But then they've got another project that they're working on, so we can triangulate some things. And I'm happy once we get it all. I don't know what that's going to look like, the final results. But based on that, we're pretty positive we can take what we have and then take NWEA and say, okay, in this skill strand, we really know what we're doing. We made an impact. Here's a place that we might tailor some professional development, and or here's a place that we might need to think about regrouping our kids for certain specific skill gaps. So hopefully I answered your question. It was clear as mud. I can try to clarify. I can try to distill it a little bit.
I mean, as far as the school grades, I mean, the growth seems to be the low-hanging fruit, I guess, if you will.
The mindset behind that is right.
More important almost.
Well, the mindset behind that's how I don't want to say just an urban school, but a school with poverty, and that's how the state recognizes our efforts, because I'll argue with anybody any day. Achievement is one thing, because we get kids who come to school. I've been a leader of a building where kids would come to school and achieve regardless of anything I did. I mean, they just have. I mean, that's just there. They have the world experience. They have the life experience. They have the vocabulary, the dialogue with adults, those type of things. Whereas with growth, I will argue that growth is more indicative of great instruction. Because regardless, growth is growth. Whether you're a high-achieving kid, you still have room to grow. So if you're a high-achieving kid and growth isn't, now you're going to see, when you're closing an achievement graph, you're going to see bigger gains. On the other end, you still should see growth. So my take on it, my philosophy is that if kids are growing, whether they're high achievers or not, that's more important. Whether they're, I'm not saying it's not important for achievement, but I'll take growth over the achievement, because to me, that's great instruction. And so, because no matter where you're at on that continuum, you're moving in the right direction.
Well, and I did want to say, and I don't know if it was Mike or you, talked about the talks with the students, even though it was time-consuming. I think that's really important because it gives the kids hope instead of being so discouraged about the constant failure. They can see that they can grow.
Yeah.
So I
And
I
our
really
building
like
principals
that.
are doing some really cool things with that, and those will kick up. Well, they happen now, but what's really cool about those in the elementaries is they'll kick up after Christmas, and we've got folks from the community. It's kind of the mentor, but they come in and the kids are talking to them about specific goals and specific areas that they want to work on, about their strengths and weaknesses. So it's really cool to watch that.
And I would offer it's especially important with growth right now with the flux that we're in with high-step and knowing if the assessment is measuring what it's intended to measure or not. So it's very important, especially with triangulating it with NWA and local assessments. So any other questions or comments for Dr. Hartley?
And get on Twitter. I'm going to tell you that will keep you with the elementary and the secondaries. That, I mean, you can. That's where we see those things that don't always show up in the data. Really great things. I'm proud of my principals.
And you should be.
And the teachers that, I mean, they're doing some awesome work despite me. So. So.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Okay, we're ready for our first public commentary. No one signed up? Okay, we'll move on to consent items.
Okay, consent items this evening, we have the approval of minutes, the human resources, including the purple addendum at your desk, a monthly financial report, and then accounts payable.
Okay, do I hear a motion that we accept the consent items?
I move to approve the consent items with the addendum as
Okay.
presented.
Aaron makes the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, Jeff seconds it. Any comments or questions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Before we move forward, want to recognize Hunter Lambright is in the audience tonight, and you just approved Hunter as our boys and girls head track coach. So, Hunter, we want to congratulate you, and thank you for being here, sir.
Go Hunter.
And if you know Hunter, he is involved as anyone at the high school and does a great job for our kids, and we appreciate that, Hunter, very much.
I'll be contacting you.
Crazy good.
I'll be contacting you.
Former track guy.
Okay, action items?
Correct.
Our action items this evening, our first one is donations, but the first three are all related to finance items. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Scalf if she would speak to them individually, but in order.
Okay, so action item 6.01 is for our monthly donations, and this month we have had a number of very substantial gifts provided to our students and our programs. So the first of those is Aught Equipment Service, Inc. They donated RHS Automotive a Hunter computer wheel balancer machine to the technology program in the automotive course. That is valued at $3,800 and has been a huge help already to that program. John and Kim Weber donated biomedical medical lab items to the Career Center. That has also been a tremendous help. That value is $3,760. The girls' golf team received $51 from Donna Spears. The boys' basketball team at the high school received $750 from Harrington Hoke. Vintage Wheels annually donates to Test Intermediate School, this year in the amount of $1,500, to provide funds for their canned food drive, as well as for the principal to take students shopping during the holiday season. So that is always a very positive thing for our students. Jim and Penny Duke also donated to the Proudly Presenting series at Civic Hall $200. So tonight we are very thankful and I ask that the board approve $10,061 in donations.
Okay, do I hear a motion? We accept the donations.
I move that we accept the donation.
Okay, Jeff makes the motion. Do I hear a second? Debbie seconds it. Any comments or questions? Just once again, a big thank you to our community who has certainly been very generous to our school system. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, the next two action items are annual action items for us as we start closing out the financial year. The first is the additional docket request for December 2017. For those new to the board, the docket is our accounts payable claim checks that we post each month. And because December has only one board meeting and it's early in the month, I would like permission to do an additional accounts payable docket later in the month. The docket would be approved by the board at the first January 2018 meeting. This allows us to pay our vendors in a timely manner and to also reflect our 2017 expenses more accurately. Tonight I ask and I recommend that the board grant permission to process an additional claims docket in December 2017.
I so move.
Okay, Jeff makes the motion.
Second.
Suzanne seconds it. Any comments or discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, action 6.03. I'm asking permission for 2017 budget appropriation transfers in our taxing funds. Each year, as we go through the process of closing the books on our taxing funds, there are line items that have been expended less than appropriated, and those that have been expended more than appropriated in the approved budget. We are required to have board action on transfers of appropriation from one major functional category to another, as expressed on the adopted budget forms. These transfers will take place as we complete our end-of-year processing, so specific dollar amounts will be presented at the January 2018 board meeting for final approval. Attached is the form of the resolution that will come before the board at that time. The resolution will accomplish the budget appropriation transfer process and balance all line item expenditures. This process shifts available appropriations from where there is not a need to where there is a need within the general fund, debt service fund, capital projects fund, and transportation operating fund. No transfers of expenses or expenditures will be made that were in excess of the total available appropriation for each fund. It's my recommendation that the school board of trustees authorize me, the treasurer, to transfer appropriations between expenditure function accounts of the 2017 budget appropriations and to conduct inter-fund transfers to enable balancing, subject to subsequent board approval.
That was a lot.
Can you repeat that?
I can thank Tony Zerwell for that lovely original.
I'll make the motion that we approve the 2017 appropriation transfers.
Do you hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Aaron seconds it. Any comments or discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
All right, our next action item this evening is 6.04, and that is our clinical affiliation agreement with Indiana University East. And I'm going to ask Dr. Reynolds if he would speak to this, please.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Terrell. This evening, I ask for your approval to continue our relationship with IU East. The agreement allows the IU East nursing students to fulfill a portion of their clinical experience requirements for graduation and to experience firsthand the expanded role of a school nurse. The letter of agreement is to extend the clinical agreement between the Board of School Trustees and the IU East Nursing Division and will allow the Richmond Community Schools to continue this relationship. And of course, the agreement is attached. I recommend that the board approves to continue the clinical affiliation agreement as presented.
Okay,
I move to approve the recommendation for the clinical affiliation agreement with Indiana University East.
all right, do you hear a second?
Second.
Okay, Suzanne seconds it. Any comments or discussion? I think the people who go to Reed Hospital, you'd be amazed at how many of our kids are working there. So this is a good program. All right. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, our next action item this evening is the Richmond High School 2018-19 Curriculum Handbook Guide, and I'm going to ask Dr. Reynolds if he would speak to that.
Absolutely. As scary as it may seem, we really need to get approval so we can move forward on scheduling. I recommend that the Richmond Community Schools Board of Trustees approve the RHS 2018-19 Curriculum Handbook as presented. Attached, you'll find a cheat sheet, a list of changes, and it was titled Curriculum Guide Notes, and the full version of the handbook. I'd like to say the attached documents are a result of a collaboration discussion with teachers and the administration at Richmond High School. I recommend that Richmond Community Schools Board of Trustees approve the RHS 2018-2019 Curriculum Handbook as presented.
I do hear a motion.
Motion.
Okay, Brad makes the motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Debbie seconds it. Any comments or discussion?
I just had a question. Other than by law, how are classes added to the curriculum per se?
They,
Or subtracted?
yeah, really driven by numbers. It can be as simple as, I think last year we added the AP European History course, and it was really a grassroots effort by the teachers and having conversation with the kids and building that interest and momentum. Part two is that it has to be aligned with something in the state-approved course description. So there has to be a course that aligns with something that the state recognizes and offers. And we kind of have one of those potential ones this year that is a pilot class. So I guess the loophole is if you would like a class that's not in those course descriptions, you can approve to have one, you can apply to have one approved, which you'll see for that innovation and open source learning class. It's a model that we have observed and witnessed at Noblesville High School, and we're looking to offer that here at Richmond.
Yeah, I was going to say the classes that are added, I mean, I really liked to see those, especially, the innovation and open source learning sounds really fun.
Yeah.
And the computer tech support, I'm really glad that our kids are going to be a part of that.
process. And what a great
So-
life skill. I mean, you kind
Right.
of go back to those pathways. And I know
Exactly.
we have, there's a lot of emotions about those new pathways, but I think that could be something that can work very seamlessly into that pathway discussion.
So, yeah. And I'd love to teach that literary interpretation. So, okay. We're ready for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, our next action item this evening is 6.06 Civic Hall Performing Arts Center lighting bid recommendation. Mr. Tidrow?
Thank you. Richmond Community Schools received bids for the Civic Hall Performing Arts Center lighting project on 12/7/2017. Proof of advertisement is available in the Office of Business Affairs. One bid was received. The bid packet is available in the Office of Operations. The following summarizes the bid. We do have a typo there. It says the RFP online, but if you change that to say summarizes the bid. The vendor name is Mid-America Sound Corporation. The base bid was $230,044.74. The recommendation, the administration recommends that the Board of School Trustees accepts the base bid from Mid-America Sound Corp. for the amount of $230,044.74. And this will be funded, as a reminder, out of the GAMP Trust Fund in the Civic Hall area. So.
I do hear a motion.
I'll make that motion.
All right, Debbie makes the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Aaron seconds it. Any comments or discussion?
Well, typically when I see bids like this, I'm a little concerned when we only get one bid, but I also know that this is, when I was looking through the quote, it's pretty detailed, so there's a lot of special in this, so I didn't want the public to think that we normally accept one bid, but it's more of a
specialty.
work process than it is anything, I think. So
We had 4 companies take the packet. Another, one of the other vendors was in contact with us the last week asking questions, so we thought we'd have at least 2, but So we were surprised by just the one, but you're right, it's very detailed.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Our next action item this evening is 6.07, the purchase agreement for C.R. Richardson. The recommendation is before you to approve that purchase agreement of C.R. Richardson by Goodwill Education Initiatives Incorporate. Before we move forward, I'd like Ron to just talk a little bit about the process and what has brought us to this point with the purchase
Well,
agreement.
Gladly. I think I've seen some emails, and maybe some of the board members aren't prepared to go forward, and that's fine if you're not, but I just got that I just got this redraft this afternoon. There was an initial draft prepared. I responded with comments, and my comments, each and requested changes were each made, so I'm comfortable with it, but if the board isn't, our timeline is such that we can defer this to your next meeting and compress the time for closing at the far end by going ahead and beginning some things that we might not do unless we had a signed purchase agreement, such as turn the surveyor loose to help us get a redefined legal description of just the CR parcel and start the title work and what have you.
And I agree with Ron. So really, it's at the will of the board. If you want to move forward, if you'd rather table it, that is absolutely acceptable as well.
My only, it was 4 o'clock when I saw the purchase agreement, so I
We didn't
I
get
have
much
not read
before
it.
that, so,
and-
yeah.
And I know people were busy, so I personally am not comfortable voting on something that I've not had time to read, so. That's just me. There's 6 others, so.
Sure.
I had a conversation with Mr. Terrell this afternoon. I read it. There was some wording about the 6-month contingency on there, which he clarified, and I think it's all good.
Well,
I think we should move forward.
do I hear a motion?
I'll motion to move forward with the sale.
I'll second it.
You got copies to execute.
All right, any other comments or discussion?
I'll say, I will vote against it. I think the asset, especially the master plan process, we should hang on to at this point, and I don't think it's critical to sell it, so I'm not going to support the sale.
Any other comments or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
All right.
Nay.
Okay.
5-2.
Do we need to poll since we have 5-2?
No.
Just,
If someone requests a polling of the board, that's fine. If not, I think the vote would show 5-2.
all right,
But I am hard.
motion carries. And now we're ready for our work session.
Dixie, if you don't mind, before we go into the work session, I have to leave. I've got to go back to my real job, or my other job, I should say. And if I may make a comment or a statement.
Okay.
It's been very seldom in the number of years that I've served on this board that I've taken time to make personal comments, but I'm going to do so tonight. This is the last board meeting of 2017. It'll be the last board meeting of my 20 years on the school board, which I will also start a new term, Lord willing, come January. It has been my pleasure of serving with a number of school board members over the last 20 years, some who are still here, some who have gone. I've served under 6 superintendents or worked with 6 superintendents and a number of administrators. We have seen I've had the opportunity to see some mountains, some valleys, and we have all come together during this time in a manner of collegiality to reach positive solutions for what is best for our students over that time. I've seen, unfortunately, the passing of 3 board members that I've had the opportunity of serving with, and I've seen students that I saw come in as preschool kids who are now in college. I've seen the graduation of my 2 children, and I've seen the growth of new board members who have come on in the last couple of years and who have added strength to this board. I'm a firm believer that the course of public education in our community, as well as in our nation, lies with the public vote and with what we do at our board meetings and our board settings every 2 weeks or wherever it may be. I am proud to serve and have been proud to serve in this capacity for the last 20 years with our current board and the previous board members that I've had the opportunity to serve with. I believe in the direction that we're going. We have a lot of things that lie ahead of us, and I just want to be a voice that will continue to serve the constituents and the people of this community. But I want to recommit myself to each of the 6 other board members that I serve with, to our superintendent and administration, but above all to every student, every family in the city of Richmond. And it has been a pleasure for 20 years, and I serve as, when I start in January, when I swear in again, I will serve as one of the longest continuous serving board members in the state of Indiana. And I do so not because of personal glory, but because I believe in public education and the mission of it. And we've got a lot of obstacles in front of us, but I believe, starting here locally with the 6 other board members that I had the pleasure of serving with, we come from different backgrounds and maybe different perspectives, but I believe we have one of the strongest boards currently that I've ever had the pleasure of serving with. And so, even though we may have disagreements in the background, I believe that when we come together in our public meetings, that we will come together as a unit with a focus on what is best for our students and what is best for our community. And I want to say that before I leave here, because Christmas is coming up and the end of 2017 is coming up as well. But it has been my pleasure for these 20 years to serve with each and every one of you. And I look forward to doing so again in the new year. So I want to share that with you.
Thank you, Rob.
And with that, I got to go.
Dear.
I was your first graduating class.
Yeah, you were.
Should have said that, that would have been hilarious.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year. See you.
Thank you.
See you next year.
Okay, now we're ready for our work session.
For our work session this evening, I'd like to invite Dan Mader and Bill Payne to the podium from Fannie and Howie. Tonight we are going to have another report regarding our educational master plan process that we are going through. And tonight what we are bringing to the board and to our public are possible considerations for options with our current buildings that we have right now and the use of those buildings. One of the things that has been very evident here in Richmond Community Schools has been the proactive nature of our board to continue to utilize our resources in a very efficient and effective manner. And our goal, my goal, and I know the board's goal as well, is to continue to do so so that we can offer programs to our students. As our community continues to change and our at-risk student numbers continue to rise, it's critical that we continue to provide the support that our students need and deserve as we move forward. So tonight what we are bringing before you and what will be presented to you and to the public is simply that the next step to look at what are options with the buildings that we currently have and making sure that we're utilizing space. A big part of this as we move forward is going to be getting community input to really look at the programs that we currently have. Maybe some of those need to be revised a little bit. Maybe they're good as they are. Maybe there are additional programs that we need to look at implementing. But again, it's really just what's the next step as we move forward with this. And I look forward after this report, during this report, for communication from the board to really give us the direction as we move forward and what that needs to look like. So with that being said, I'll open it up for further comments from the board, or we can turn it over directly to Mr. Payne and let them begin their presentation. Seeing none?
All right, thank you. President Robinson, members of the board, Superintendent Terrell, thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to provide just a little bit of context in terms of our activities in the study, both past, present, and where we'll be heading in the future. and then Dan will be providing a little bit more detail on some of those components. So we started out with educational visioning. This was a relatively high-level effort that would involve 51 community members, patrons, business leaders, and students. Just as you start every board meeting with your vision and mission statement, we wanted to make sure that we had your vision, your community's vision in mind as we move forward through this study. We completed a historic analysis of 4 buildings. Certainly the most significant is Richmond High School. We wanted to make sure that whatever might be proposed in the future, that we respect that historic fabric. And by the way, for some, these may seem like disparate pieces of information. Ultimately, the key to a successful educational facility master plan is weaving all of these threads together so that they make sense going forward for the next 5 to 10 years. We completed a demographic study. The purpose of that was to project enrollment over the next 10 years, both specifically to Richmond Community Schools. So the boundary was set, and our demographic study worked within that area. We performed a capacity analysis of all of the buildings. That's important to know where you are today relative to capacity versus enrollment and projected enrollment. We completed preliminary building evaluations. Ultimately, those will inform as we go forward and with a master plan start to put costs associated with building improvements or facility improvements. That'll help us in that process. We completed 4 initial community input sessions as well as an input session with high school and middle school students at the high school. So we shared the information we developed to that point in time and received input back both in terms of commentary as well as through an input medium that we use, software Turning Point. And all of this information, by the way, is of course posted on your website. And then we took a look at efficiency options. So all these pieces together ultimately will inform that educational facility master plan. But we also know that we need to circle back, as Superintendent Terrell indicated, and probably put some more flesh on the bones in terms of programming, because ultimately that's the key. Without knowing what you want to do programming-wise going forward within the buildings, our exercise in terms of evaluating the buildings and improvements that might happen will be hollow, or shallow, if you will. So that'll be a next step, and then again, gathering information. We had a schedule ultimately that said that we would complete everything within 12 months, but as you have seen, we've been very methodical in going through these steps, making sure to complete each one before we go forward. So at this point, there's no need to commit to a final date, and in fact, we're confident we'll be moving into the first quarter of 2018 before we probably complete all the steps. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Dan.
As Bill mentioned, we've got some things we have to accomplish yet before we get to the end. We really haven't talked a great deal about facility improvements and programs and curriculum at the high school. That's still coming. And we've started to gather data on the facility needs throughout the district. So we'll have that very shortly. And then obviously one of the big pieces of this is coming together with some cost options. How do you take all of this information, put it into some options for the board that have some dollars attached to it, because ultimately that always comes into play. And then we need to have a second round of community meetings where we get all of this out in the public and give the board the opportunity to get some more information and some more opinion from the community at large, and then putting that all together into compiling the results and a final report. So that's all yet to come. Just to review, when we developed some options, and these are examples of options. They're not the exclusive list of options, but it's a range, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. One of the realities is the building capacity currently exceeds the number of students in the district as a whole. At the elementary school level, the capacity is at 90%, but if you can see on the chart that it's distorted amongst different elementary schools, all the way from 78% to 112%. So the average is 90, but they're kind of spread out. At the intermediate school, it's 70%. So we have an excess capacity of about 600 students, and this is today, as we sit today with the 2017-2018 enrollment. And then at the high school, it's also at 70%, where there's about 550 students extra capacity. And the reason that this becomes a more difficult decision, I think, is always keeping in mind in the background that the demographic projections are, although the rate of decline is flattening, it's not as steep as it was, but it still nevertheless hasn't hit a point where it's turned around and going the other direction. So this is an issue that the board is going to face and continue to face moving forward, at least for the next 10 years. So with that, as I said, we put together some examples of how to look at this from ways just from a numbers perspective. And as some other folks have mentioned already, at some point this needs to tie back with programs, and there are, as we go through some of these options, we'll already throw out some considerations that mitigate some of the numbers. So let's just go right into it. Overall, we've developed 3 generic options. One has 3 different versions, so I guess you could look at it that there are 5 options, and they do varying they're varying degrees of success in terms of balancing out capacities. So that's sort of the big overview chart, and I'll go through them sort of one at a time. Option A is accepting no building closures. We keep the current stock and probably look at a redistricting at the elementary school to balance out the swings in population, all the while doing this program review and revision that we've been talking about that needs to overlay on top of this and inform any decisions that come back. At the intermediate level, one of the things that came out of the community meetings was a support of a 5, 6, 7, 8 grade structure. I think there are some cost implications that go along with that from a transportation standpoint. So that's something for the board to consider as well. So the sort of the big picture general things as we talk about potential taking buildings offline, you only recognize cost savings fully when the building is taken off the roll, as you did with CR tonight. Other than that, you still are heating the buildings and still have maintenance and those kinds of things. So that factors into the decision. As we look forward to some of the program changes we anticipate that you will be discussing at Richmond High School, there are pieces of the building, particularly in the older section, where the classrooms are much smaller than standard, and we anticipate that the number of classrooms will actually diminish because they'll be made larger to deal with some programs that collaboration spaces and some of the other things that we've talked about in the educational visioning component. So this will slightly increase the utilization for the high school. And then, as I mentioned, anytime we start talking about changing where kids are coming from and going to, there's the potential for a transportation cost impact in any of those models. So in option A, with no closures, same grade configuration, we have the 90% efficiency at the elementary school. When you look at it globally, 70% at the intermediate school and 70% at the high school. Option B1 starts to look at what happens if you start to take a building offline. And B1 chooses Hibbert as one option. So to reiterate, you only save money when you actually remove the building from the roll. This would assume that we would continue to redistrict for the elementary schools to balance that out. We would have to deal with the Logos program and relocate that potentially somewhere. So there would be that kind of programmatic review and revisions. And then that 5, 6, 7, 8 discussion is still available in this option with Dennis and Tess. So one of the issues to deal with if Hibbert is taken offline is that we need to change a location for the life skills program. And then, as it said, the elementary school boundaries and transportation costs for the grade configuration. So that's one. And what that does is it takes the elementary efficiency up to 92%, takes the intermediate up to 87%, and the high school, because we haven't changed anything there, stays at 70. Option B2 and frankly option B3 are variations on a theme, just changing different buildings. In this option, it would close Vale as an example. The same sort of parameters are involved. In this case, Hibbert would be converted to an elementary school. And so now we have that same issue with the Hibbert Life Skills, the intermediate school life skill kids. The elementary school boundaries still is an issue, and the transportation cost still comes into play. When we would do that sort of reconfiguration, it would take the elementary efficiency up to 91%. The intermediate stays at 87, and the high school stays at 70. And then the last version of option B, it would be to close Star. And there's just a minor difference there because of the different capacity between Star and Vale. But all the other points are the same. The itemization up at the top, and then the considerations that come into play. And in this case, the elementary efficiency is at 90%, so that would stay basically the same as your status quo today. The intermediate moves up to 87%, and the high school stays at 70. And then just to show you one option that, you know, sort of out at the other end of the spectrum would be option C, where you really take a crack at everything. You close Hibbert, you close Vale, you close Star, so you take 3 buildings off of the roll, and you do a completely different grade reconfiguration. It would be PK3, and the intermediate buildings would become 4 through 7, and we would create an 8th grade center at the high school by the Career Center, that section next to the cafeteria. So in this example, all the buildings are utilized at or close to capacity. Transportation costs are going to be different because we've moved people around significantly. As the note says, it's a major upheaval in grade configuration. And we still have to deal with getting life skills kids in the right environment, in the right place. But it does show, moving people around, you get to essentially 100% efficiency at the elementary school, 92% at the intermediate school, which would be 4-7, and 88% at the high school. So really this is the only one that moves additional kids to the high school as an option to increase that efficiency. But again, as we talked about in the very beginning, some of the things that will happen programmatically at the high school from an educational perspective may have an influence as the board down the road starts to think about, okay, what kind of options do we really want to consider when it comes to building efficiencies? So with that, we'll entertain questions.
I'll start. So one, I think that's kind of important as we look at the series of options in the B series, B1, B2, B3. One of the considerations as we looked at possible buildings there were buildings that are in a corridor that are all closely related, whereas opposed to geographically, the others are positioned across our corporation. You want to talk to that just a little bit about?
Yeah, it was
reasoning
looking
there?
where there was cluster of schools, and where taking the schools offline wouldn't take one of the quadrants and make it, we sort of looked at, if you take 27 and 40 as a quadrant, you've got 4 quadrants, and we were trying to make sure that we didn't, have a quadrant that didn't have a school. So there was no, as I think I said a couple meetings ago, the quality of the building maintenance is so high here that kind of the low-hanging fruit of, well, this building, whatever it might be, is in really bad shape, so that's an easy decision to take that offline. You don't have that because they're all in really good shape.
Yeah, we used that excuse last time.
Yeah, can't use it again.
I think it's kind of important to reiterate that these are, based on the information that you gathered, these are your sort of scientific recommendations, and that it's up to us to take it to the next place regarding programs, regarding little p politics, I guess, what will our community bear, and those kinds of things. And so before anyone gets super excited about any of those, they need to understand that. And I want to say it again, just in case they just started watching.
There's no recommendation here. This is just, I guess, information for the board to show you about capacities and what it takes to try to improve the efficiency rates, whether that dovetails with programs and whether that dovetails with grade structures and other things that the board has to decide. This is just another piece of information in the tool chest that you're going to have when we get it all put together to make a comprehensive decision about where to go from a facilities perspective.
Well, and I think like Suzanne said, that this is, the options are a way to start the conversation based on the facts that we have thus far. But there's certainly lots of avenues for tweaking other things to look at.
I would be stunned if any one of these options was actually a final solution.
Well, and as we have said before, we have to get deep into programmatic conversations regarding what we want to, what we value, what is working, what maybe could be better. In previous conversations like this, it's been, gosh, how long has it been since Resources for Results? That was
Probably,
a decade ago?
yeah, probably 10 years, probably.
Gee
9
whiz.
years, probably.
So we have to then have a conversation about, which are our, what do we want to preserve? And then as Mr. Weber is screaming from the mountaintops, which I appreciate, is we don't want to just be as good as we have been. We want to be at the top of the game in Indiana and beyond. And so, but we have to do within our means, or ask for help. And so this is where we are. We have to know what we know and decide what we value, and then do it the best way possible. So I think it's a good piece of information. I just want to make sure that and no one gets too excited yet. So.
Will we have, how do we go about collecting the criteria that we're going to use? Like when we did it, last time we did this, we were looking at certain teaching strategies to help improve student achievement, like 2 or 3 sections per building, like, those different things. Like how what is our next step to get to that level of expertise that we need to give us the next 5 to 10 years?
Right, how do we guide ourselves through that next process? What are our, what are deal breakers? Like, no matter what, we're not losing this. And that's the start.
The sacred cows, if you
Yeah,
will.
I guess that's a better way to put it.
Must-haves.
But it's
Must-haves
also,
is
it's
good.
also
That's even
about,
better.
you know, at one point we had discussion of magnet schools. At one point we had discussion of, actually we had a discussion of a magnet school in each quadrant. I mean, we've been all over the board on a lot of different things like that over the years, but, you know, I'm sure an issue of contention will be the logos program and
An early college.
early college program. As mentioned earlier, someone mentioned earlier, the pre-K. How does that fit? So, the grade configuration, I think, is a big piece that conversation has to take place at the same time. You know, whether we change the grades or we don't change the grades, but I mean, that I think has to be, I think that has to be parallel to our discussion, our programs.
I don't know if this should come into discussion or not, but I mean, we just spent a lot of money in, what, '08 or '09 doing the Hibbert building to get logos in there. And all that, so. I
You
mean,
mean in Hibbert?
what did I say?
You said Hibbert.
Is that Hibbert?
You said Hibbert.
I thought I said, okay. Yeah, I mean, we did a.
Right, I
pretty
mean, those are all
extensive-
things to consider, obviously, and where do those things fit best?
Right.
Are they in their current structure? Are they what we still want? If it looks different, what does it look like? Those are the programmatic conversations.
Well, and I think you have to also look at when we did that, we had the population to support the buildings that we had.
Right.
And as population decreases, we were left, because we have closed so many schools down the line. I mean, you have to remember, we used to be 12,000 kids strong with 15 elementaries and 5 middle schools and a high school. And as we have continually shrank because of our declining enrollment, you're left with fewer and fewer options. You used to be able to look at buildings, well, that one is in really bad shape, needs a lot of repair, so that one can go. We're down to, our buildings are good. So it's really hard at this point.
Right, and if you operate on less than, 100% efficiency, or maybe that's one of the conversations, where do we want our efficiency level to be?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable at 90% and above, I'll tell you that.
Right, and so if that's the case, then what are the costs associated with that, and can we afford to continue that? And if we don't, then what's it gonna take to operate at that level? And and having zero excess makes everyone uncomfortable. And, which you didn't address this time, but I know you've done it before, how is building capacity even calculated? Because it's not, in the old days, it would be like, well, how many little desks can we get in a room? And that's not how that works.
Right now, all of these calculations are based on board policy of an average of the current PK4.
Gotcha.
Your average is 22 students per classroom, so that's what we used. In the 5 through 8, it's 25 students per classroom, so that's what we use. So it's
But even what is a classroom? And is it a shared space? And the way we use space is very different from the way we use space.
And it gets particularly fuzzy when you start getting to the high school
Of
and
course.
talk about collaborative spaces and
Right.
and all of these, learning on the go
Sure.
areas where kids learn not maybe in a traditional classroom setting.
Right. And what are the
How do
best
you-
practices and what do we want it to look like? That's the other thing.
Because teaching and learning has changed.
And continues to.
And there's research, and we have talked about it on the board, that when you have a high at-risk population, they need more space. And there's a lot of things to figure into that, because we no longer, classrooms with the 5 rows of desks and a teacher in front is no longer the way anybody teaches. So,
The most creative thing they did was get the desks in a circle.
so anyway, all those
Well, and
things
then
have to be.
I don't know whether you want to talk about the model classrooms that are at the high school.
Yeah, what's the feedback been on
Are-
those?
Dr. Reynolds, you want to talk about the model classrooms over there and how that's
Yeah.
going?
Yeah, it's been real exciting. Once you get by the novelty and the, trying to race them around the classroom, because they're very mobile and they move very quickly. So once you get past the novelty, the teachers do like them, it seems. The nodes, I forget what the other set, I don't know if the other set has a name, but they have the clipboards that you can divide and put down, or you can expand the table, whiteboards. They like it. They like the mobility of the transformational spaces. Sometimes you have to have rows, and
Oh, absolutely.
to do some sort of assessment. But a lot of times you're doing learning stations or group work or independent work and need to move away a little bit. So the reviews have been good.
That flexibility, to make somebody's point, takes more space than typical.
Could you also tell me, I don't know if anyone else cares to know this, but in other cases where you've helped schools through these kinds of processes, and given the fact that we really want this to be more program-driven than space-driven, even though we know eventually we're going to have to come back to space, what's typically the next step? While I get that these are sort of a conversation starter, how do we get to the programs?
I think the next step is, you've got a high-level educational vision, what some of the outcomes are. I think the next step is to go a level more in detail. Analyze, okay, just as an example, let's talk about collaborative learning at the high school, and where does that fit in, and what impact is that going to have on the amount of space that it takes, and what's staff's acceptance of that kind of, and is there staff development that goes along with. So it's even one little piece like that starts to have multiple prongs that come out of that. And so that's collaborative learning. And then you get into science as an example. What constitutes science curriculum today versus 10 years ago even. It's changing rapidly, and what are the impacts of those kind of curriculum ideas on a traditional science lab, and what do you have to change? And science labs are expensive, so can you find ways to not sitting at a lab table, as an example, sitting at a lab table and hearing a lecture, the lab stuff is kind of wasted. So if you can figure out, okay, how are we going to use labs in our curriculum, and how often do kids go to a lab space, then you can start to be more efficient, and that has an impact. So so that's why I guess what I'm saying, we need to get to that next level of discussion, more so than just the high level big picture vision.
And so is that typically, and we can do it however we want, I guess, but is that typically then another meeting / I think you used the word workshop earlier, here
I think
first?
we would start with the educational professionals that you have, and then bring a package to the board in a workshop fashion where you can actually talk about it and have discussions.
Well, I think another part that we have to look at too, the flexibility piece is key with me. And the reason being is because back in the older days, things didn't change that much. And now it's every year.
Rate of change is
There's something different that's happening. And you have to be able to adjust without expending a whole lot of money in order to meet criteria that comes down from wherever, the state level.
It's kind of a low bar to look at it this way, but we want to make sure that the building doesn't get in the way.
Right.
It's not that, oh, if you do this, it's going to solve all of your educational issues. If you do this, the building won't be a problem. It still takes the educators and the kids to make it successful.
I don't think the building is the problem, but I guess in the process, I'd love to have our education professionals involved, but we have a great group of parents, and I think those voices need to be amplified at all levels, for special needs kids to first time, maybe high school graduate. At all levels, we need to try to reach out and get those people involved, because
that's a really good idea.
That's more important to me.
The community input is going to be one of the biggest factors on this. And, they're the stakeholders.
So I think one of the things that Jeff asked, what do we do going forward? For our public to review what brought us to this point, we began talking about the high school and knowing that we were going to need to address some issues there, looking at everything from HVAC to our classrooms and what is that going to look like as we move forward. And at that time, the board, very wisely in my opinion, directed us to really take an assessment, an evaluation of all of our buildings to find out where we are, so we could look at, to make sure, just as this board has done in the past, that we are utilizing our resources efficiently and effectively. So what buildings, how do we want to continue to move forward? And I think one of the things we need to talk about as we move forward, not just with the board and with the educators, but also with our community, is what are the efficiency rates that we look at with these different models, and what's our comfort level with those? As Jeff mentioned, he's not crazy about it being 90+%, and I would have to agree. That is concerning, because then if you have an influx of students, and especially an elementary building as it moves back and forth, you don't want to have to redraw the district lines every other year with the challenges that go with that. So what does that look like? How do we do that? How do we address that? So I think a big part of that is we've gathered all of this information again to provide to the board, so that you can have all these different pieces. And now we're to the point where we do need to engage our community, our stakeholders. And our stakeholders are our educators, they are our parents, they are our kids, they are our community members, and try to get from them what do they want from Richmond Community Schools as we move forward. And so I think one of the things that we need to know from you, from the board, is the direction in which you would like to proceed with this. I think as we go into the new year, we need to look at the possibility of several community meetings at different levels with different topics of discussions at those meetings to try and gather from our community what are the sacred cows, the must-haves of our corporation, so then we can begin to build that plan of how do we do that, still keeping in mind using our resources in the most efficient and effective manner for our students.
Do we need to gather one more time, or do we go out to the community? I feel like there's a format missing.
I do too. Yeah, I think.
To where, okay, yes, I don't disagree. I think we need to go to all these folks, but shouldn't we guide, I don't know if it's us, the board, or us all, I think all of us around this table, I think we have to have some structure by which to gather that information. I don't think we have that yet.
I agree.
So
I think that'd be great.
if we could sit together and sort of figure out what that might look like, how we go out and ask, what are we looking for, how are we going to get that? I mean, when I say how are we looking for, I don't mean we know what we want to know, but I think we in order to keep, but I think we need to keep it on task. And while a wish list is great and we need to get those things, how do we gather that? So I guess the format is the only thing, that's the only word I can
No,
think of.
it wasn't, he had mentioned a workshop, I think was.
But that was for us, I think, right?
Well, it could be
I think you
open.
could expand that, yeah.
I think we could have
Okay.
similar to a board meeting,
Well,
but
we've done that before
but
here.
open to the public.
That's how the mission
Where-
vision stuff was.
Yeah, that's how
Yeah,
we
to
did
where,
it. So.
you know, community input in the very early stage, if anyone wants to come in and, you know, we might have some of the best resources around.
Well, and we've done that before. I mean, it's how we ended up with, you know, testing isn't our number one priority, according to parents. I mean, we talked about that. It's like, how do we, and we have actually deleted assessments because of those conversations. So we have done that before quite successfully, but we still, someone in this room needs to come up, what are the guiding questions during that workshop? Is that these gentlemen? Do we do that?
Well,
That's,
and there's some questions that, you know, we talked about the sacred cows, but there's also questions that we should ask, what should we change?
yeah, is that working?
Yeah, and that's
Still
what I
working?
was gonna get to too, because I think besides what are your must-haves, but also what would you be willing to give up to add on something that would make us stronger and better?
Yeah, and I don't want to beat grade configurations to death, but I think that definitely is going to have a bearing on what we do. I mean, so do
Anything
we
including
not
money.
change grade configurations? Do we change grade configurations?
How
I mean,
important
in
is that
itself-
to you? That's, I guess, the
Right,
question.
that in itself could be one topic that we're out, we spend 2 months.
Well, it's our job to say, how important is grade configuration to you? If it's that important to you, do you understand that that means we're going to have to come up with this many thousands of dollars more in transportation or whatever? And so it's our job to help people understand, well, we get it that that's important, or, you know, and just, so what's the trade-off? I mean, but we need to see what's important
But I think that's where we
first.
need time to discuss it as a board. If it's an open meeting, that's fine, but we need more information, like, if we do this, how much is it gonna cost? Or if we do this, how much is it gonna cost? And what's it gonna look like and all that kind of thing.
Yet, I don't know that I would have too much trouble talking programs and,
You know, I've
and,
got
and what do I
questions
want
that-
more?
You know, I'm probably gonna email Todd either tonight or tomorrow, but like, our elementary numbers were, Charles is 112%, Westview's 102%. How many kids go to Westview and Charles that don't live in that district?
Right. They don't.
None? There's
No.
Very-
And that's the strong line the board took
We did.
3 years ago.
Okay.
Rob, was it 3 summers
We
ago
had
we
to.
changed that? To where we don't do,
We
and
had
that's
to
a big
'cause we
part of the
couldn't manage
transfers.
it.
We don't, and we stick to that. So
Okay.
there aren't people going to elementaries that live in another district.
There's a few
With the
minor-
caveat
there's a
of,
few
as
minor.
long, I mean, if a parent comes in and says they're living at X address and we do our normal check and they figure out a way around it, I'm not saying that that isn't a possibility.
Sure.
But from what we know, our building people do a very good job at checking addresses and making sure that where they live.
But 2 or 3 years ago, Westview had empty classrooms. This was just 2 or 3 years ago.
That's when people could go wherever they wanted. I
So-
mean, most
Rob,
of-
how many, do you remember how many transfers we had at that time?
We had about 900 that we took back to their home schools.
This is the
in
third
some
generation of
capacity,
that, though, because Jeff's right. We had so many, we moved some out of Westview at one
Into
point.
this.
Then they were the low.
Right.
Now they're back up again. So
Included
it's
the magnet
population
school.
shifting, and
We
it's
had
really
Star as
hard.
a magnet, so those kids went back to their home school. Half of them, so.
And that's,
The
the one
Star
that's-
still
that's a
is
touchy
kind of a
situation. I mean,
Well, because neighborhoods shift.
right.
The people age out of a
Parents are so
neighborhood, and
protective
then
of
new
their
families
kids
come
and
in.
where they're getting their
We still
education
have
at.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's parents should have that right.
It was like
Right, to do what?
To be proactive in their child's, where they even go. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily like that policy, but.
Yeah, that's a tough one, though, because of the managing enrollment. That's the hard thing, because then now you got somebody who actually moves right next door to Charles, and they can't get in there because it's full.
But Brad,
We were
that's a
there
great
before.
question.
And then
That's a-
it becomes
that's a
an
tough
issue
one.
with busing again.
That too.
Well, if you choose an out-of-district, you don't get a bus. I mean, if I live in Charles and choose Westview, it's
Yeah.
up to me to transport them. child.
And that's okay too, but like I said, what got us into the issue is that then someone would move across the street from Charles, right in the district. And I'm sorry, all the seats are full of people who don't live here. That's where
I mean,
that's harder to manage.
It's not a
And that's where,
huge one. It's just, I
go
think
to what Jeff was
Yeah,
saying.
no, I
the
get it, I
90%
get it.
I think if you
capacity is,
not customer focused.
No, I get it.
Well, I mean, it makes a
I
difference
don't
because,
know, but it just causes a lot of
you know,
heartache.
and I said this, I've said this before, and, yeah, I've heard parents out there that, and staff, that like fifth grade in a middle school, and I've heard some that don't like fifth grade in middle school. So, you know, right now, if we're not changing grade configurations at all, then if our efficiencies are 85% to 90% in our elementary schools, we're on target. We do a little bit of boundary line adjustments and upset just, a few people, and we can solve the problem. It'll only be for a couple of years because it'll change again, but
Yeah, they do shift.
but if we've decided that we don't want fifth grade in middle school, then to me, that changes the whole dynamics of what we do with the elementary.
Absolutely does.
Those are your immovable objects, so is what you're saying is,
Yeah,
okay, what do we
I-
want our efficiencies to be? What levels are we comfortable with?
So then if we do that, then I don't see how we could close Hibbert, or, I'm just using that as an example. I mean, it's just, again, like you said, Dixie, what do we have to change or want to change?
Or need to change.
Yeah, and what's important?
Well, if it need to change, then I guess we just need to make sure that that's factored in.
yeah, I mean, do we touch the whole system, or do we just concentrate on the high school? It's,
Well, and funny thing is, we got here because we said, well, gosh, we don't want to just target the high school without
Right.
making sure we're not looking at the bigger
you-
picture.
but you
But
know
if in
what?
the end we
Well-
say, we're kind of comfortable where the rest of it is, we're going to hone in on the high
and,
school.
I think maybe we're pulling the wool over our own eyes here, saying, hey, that's still a valid scenario. So-
Possibly, sure.
Well,
It is.
you know what? Making the high school 7 through 12 is valid too, and that's not up there. So,
But I think, did we decide that might be a stretch space-wise?
Yeah.
It would be
The
a
only
stretch
reason, the
facility.
only reason I threw that 8th grade piece in there was because I did a real quick, it fits so nicely in that career center area.
And there's a fair number of eighth graders taking
It has a
classes
separate-
up, too.
Separate entrance, has its own parking area, access to the cafeteria. It isn't, if we were even go down and explore that, there is an issue there with phys ed. So that's a negative. Access to, for advanced kids to be able to get to some high school programs, that would be a positive. So there's all kinds of stuff there.
well,
Again,
that
as soon
changes
as
the
you're-
dynamics of
yeah.
the 5th grade with.
That's right, because as soon as you take 8th grade out, now
Now it's 5 through 7.
Our middle schools, intermediate buildings
and
just drop down to 60-some% capacity, so then are we moving 4th graders up? So that, when you start to, and we've had conversations and tried to play through all the different, and
We
there,
didn't even talk about a 4, 5, 6, 7.
yeah,
Oh, goodness.
so,
Oh, goodness. That makes my heart race.
yeah. And,
Yeah, I think I would rather stay 5, 6, 7, but that's not an educational decision, that was a
Correct.
personal
That's a
decision.
space deal, for sure.
So we can definitely come back in January and have a work session amongst the board and the cabinet, and we can include the directors with that to talk through what is next, what are the questions we want, how does that look, what's the format we want to use for community meetings,
And what
for
kind of, yeah,
stakeholders,
exactly.
who are the stakeholders we need to target, to make sure that we get the voice heard from all the different groups as we move forward with it.
It gives us a little bit of time to soak this in, too.
Absolutely,
I would
and
feel-
several of you have, as board members, have been through this process before. And so, I think it's great that you use that experience going back, so that when we come in January, you can say, hey, look, in the past, this worked very, very well. I would recommend we do something like this. Others can bring examples from different places you've been to talk through. And from there, I think then we come up with that, what's next?
Sounds like a plan to me.
Yeah, I think it makes some sense logically and just comfort level for us to help guide the next set of conversations.
Because I don't think we're ready to go anywhere else yet.
No, I don't
We
either.
gotta-
I don't
We have to
either.
get our ducks in a row. We all have to have ownership and be involved.
Well,
in
and
what we're
grade
doing.
configuration is gonna be a major part of it, but it shouldn't be the only thing. I don't like that it would guide the
Well,
conversation completely.
the only reason I kept having the grade configuration, because that impacts tremendously the buildings.
Absolutely, absolutely, which,
And transportation
oh,
costs.
absolutely.
But, you know, the transportation cost doesn't concern me nearly as much as everything else.
Okay, so the transportation
Could we just go back to Sosol and say,
Feasibility?
reduce your contract?
feasibility would be more important than.
We can.
I might remind, never mind.
Well, and then we went
Transportation
through
costs. We got
all that
6 elementaries and
transportation
2 middle schools.
conversation.
There's your
to
first
save
graders at Star,
$500,000.
second graders at Charter.
You know, by the time we're done, maybe we'll just buy all the buildings over around the high school and
Or
make it a
hesitate to
K-12
spend.
complex.
There you go. You know, I hope that one thing that comes out of this that our public sees is that there is not a hidden plan that's already in place.
And
We
that-
truly don't know where we're going to end up.
It's so important for people to understand that, because we know that we cannot sit and not think about all of these things. And if we make a decision not to move anything and not to save any money, that's a decision that has some consequences, and so,
But encourage them also, though, to send us their thoughts. Send us
Absolutely.
their, you know, maybe on the web page and invite them to provide suggestions or something. I don't know.
and
We
what's
could even
important.
set up a special
Sure.
email address just for this, that could,
Yeah, what's
everything
important
goes
to you.
there. and-
I don't have a problem.
That actually is a really good idea.
I
That
don't
way
have a
it's-
problem reading 100 different ideas, so it's easy to narrow down.
Well, it's too important not to, and finding out what's important to our community. And the thing is, obviously, sometimes we even get kind of hung up in, what do we do now that you want to protect and flourish? But what is it that we aren't doing that we need to do? I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, what else is out there? And so while we have all of you here that know that as well as anyone, and we're on the road to a lot of that with some of the way that technology is being used and the options now. I mean, but as in those pictures that we saw, yeah, there was a fair amount of technology. There was also a fair amount of sand and dirt and outside and
Crayons.
so and crayons, right? So
Which is
We
how
need
you marry
space
the two,
for
which is
all
funny
of
because the
that.
example you're saying was the sand and dirt and the crayons. They had an iPad on a stand right above it taking a picture of it.
exactly,
It was-
but how cool was that?
it
I
was,
think that's
you
the
know.
kind of stuff that we have to be thinking about when we talk about space and programs and use of space and
And like Brad mentioned earlier, was it you mentioned the pathways into the middle school as far as? the-
Yeah,
That's a
the
whole
state
other
pathways that
conversation.
just
That
came out,
conversation.
there's a whole new dynamic coming across.
So if
That's
that's,
only
personally, I'd like
2
to
weeks
see
old
wood
right
shop
now.
and metal shop back in the elementary, or at middle
And
schools, so.
the thing is,
I wouldn't disagree with that.
that's actually some validity to it because of the career path
right,
element of this.
that
They're trying to-
exploration going back where it needs to
Absolutely.
be, as long as
And
they
you know
don't make
what,
them
Dr.
commit in
Reynolds and
6th grade.
Mr. Sunnison and I, Brad, just had that very conversation this week, because it's crucial. The good side of it is, while all of that is so new, as I mentioned in an email to all of you, I've been selected to be one of 11 soups to be an advisory committee
That's a
to
good
the State Board of Ed and our state superintendent. So we'll be able to be in on those conversations and get some of that information firsthand and hopefully before a lot of others, but even influence, what does that process look
That's
like
the
as we
big
move
thing
forward?
right there, is the people who are actually involved in what happens in a school can talk about it.
Yes.
Because I'm sorry,
Didn't
none
happen
of
before
them,
now.
none of them have their feet in the school too often enough.
And I think the other thing that will come from many of these conversations is there are so many great things that are happening every day in our corporation that we can focus on and see what those are and build off of them.
Right, and how might the space better serve what is already wonderful? Some of the things that are happening right now, maybe this maybe there's something we could do to make that better.
Absolutely.
And now's the time to talk about that, which is why we said we didn't want to focus just on the high school.
Well, and that's what we were talking about when we said things, that must-haves to make us better. And,
The best. I mean, we want to be the best.
Absolutely.
I think we already are, but I mean, we want to stay the best. How about that?
Well, Mr. Mader and Mr. Payne, if the board doesn't have any further questions, we appreciate your help thus far when facilitating this, and we continue to look forward to working in this in January.
thank you. Thank you. Have a great holiday.
Yes, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
You too.
You too.
I guess we need to know also at the point of when they consider their contract complete.
We're just gonna keep on using it, man.
Okay, we're
Oh, the services
ready for our second public commentary. No one signed up? Okay. Lost.
Preview of upcoming meetings.
Preview of upcoming meetings and events.
So I'll start this. Very excited to announce Christmas break for students is December 21st through January 5th. And I know all of our students look forward to having that time off, as well as our educators. And we appreciate the work they put in this first semester. They've done a great job. Teacher Professional Development Day was mentioned in Dr. Hartley's presentation, will be January 5th. If you guys remember last year, that was just an amazing time for our teachers. Again, this year, all of the sessions are being led by our people. We have one person who's coming in from outside the district to kind of keynote some different initiatives that we've been utilizing, but they've been led by the concerns that our people have and the things that we need to address there, so very excited about that. And our next board meeting will be January 10th of the year 2018. Anybody remember Y2K? That's scary. 2018, how about that?
I'm gonna die.
So,
I'm not gonna make it.
other events or meetings that you guys wanna, anybody?
I just think that probably on behalf of the board, we want to wish all of our staff and students and community partners and everyone a happy holiday, safe holiday, and we appreciate everything that you're doing for our kids. And yes, now for, oh no, we have to, press conference? Nothing? Okay. All right, bell ringer.
I thought the Merry Christmas was the
Our bell ringer this year is the mini Christmas programs and events that have gone on. We have had students that have performed at the mall, at the Depot District, at the Salvation Army, out at IU East, and then all of our individual school programs, and we still have a few more to go. We appreciate all the hard work of our students and our teachers and educators there as well. And so we just appreciate all of their work and efforts. And again, as has already been said, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.
Adjourned.